Good afternoon, happy Sunday, and welcome to another wonderful Cook Along Live. This is going to be one of the weird ones where we actually don't cook anything that we're going to be eating today. We're going to be prepping for our Christmas Eve dinner, which, as you may or may not have heard, is going to be a beautiful Beef Wellington. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be getting our dough started, and then I have a full tenderloin that I got from Costco, a really nice piece of prime tenderloin. We're going to get that sectioned off for the Wellington. And we're just going to kind of get that wrapped up and set aside so that it has a little bit of time to rest before the actual cooking day. So before we get started, I have everything measured out. So I've got my 250 grams of bread flour, I've got 3 grams of salt, and 55 grams of water. I just put it in the freezer because I want it to get really cold. And then I've got about 205 grams of butter. Now the reason that we're weighing it all out is because you'll always get a consistent result if you have the exact same measurements. So if you don't already have one, I highly recommend you get a kitchen scale. And you have plenty of time between now and Thursday to make this dough. So if you're watching it live and then want to go ahead and do this maybe tomorrow or Tuesday, that'll work just fine. The dough will stay stable for a couple of days in the fridge. I'm probably going to throw mine in the freezer and pull it out on Wednesday, just to make sure that it doesn't go bad on me. But without further ado, let's get started. I've got my mixing bowl actually in the fridge, and you'll notice that the theme when you're making this kind of a dough is you want to keep everything cold. The warmer it gets, the more likely it is that the butter's going to melt, something else is going to start kind of incorporating into the flour, and that's really not what you want. You want this to stay very separate and distinct. A lot of things like puff pastry, which is not what we're making tonight, when they laminate the dough, all of the layers have to stay cold and stay separated. The warmer the butter gets, the more it incorporates into the actual flour and water, and it kind of, as it mixes, makes the dough less flaky and a little bit more thick. So keeping everything as cold as possible just maintains the separation. So that's what we're trying to do here. So we're going to go ahead and get our flour into our bowl. And again, like I said, this is 250 grams of bread flour. For this Beef Wellington, depending on how big it's going to be, you may want to double this recipe and use 500 grams of flour here. And again, like 110 grams of water, 6 grams of salt. Speaking of salt, that's what's going in next, 3 grams. And we're going to put in our butter, which I also have in the fridge, staying cold. And I've already cubed mine up. So go ahead and get your butter nice and cubed. We're going to go ahead and put that in the bowl as well. I'm actually going to go ahead and do this. And what we're going to do is mix this on low until the butter gets all crumbly. It's going to look almost like coarse sand. I don't know if you like sand, but I certainly don't. Coarse and irritating and gets everywhere. Star Wars joke. We're just going to get that on low, not stir, but the setting after stir. And we're just going to keep going until that starts to kind of crumble up. Now, while we're waiting on our dough to kind of incorporate and get to the consistency that we want, we're going to go ahead and start trimming our beef tenderloin. And yes, Dave, beef is what's for dinner, or will be on Thursday anyway. So I've got my large tenderloin here. This is a full beef tenderloin. You'll notice that on one end, if you have yours in front of you, there's almost like a 2-flap side and then a much thinner side. I'm going to put on some gloves just because it makes it easier to keep your hands kind of clean. There we are. Maybe this camera over here will work a little bit better. On this side over here, you can see that there's almost like a flap that kind of gets separated. This part of the tenderloin from basically here all the way up until this double bit, this part's called the club, or like the head, I guess, the club of the tenderloin. You'll notice that from the club, extending about maybe 12 inches, is a piece of meat that's about the same thickness all the way across. And that's great. This is the part that we're going to be using for our Wellington. Now you can cut as big or as small a piece out of this as you need to. And then everything over here, you'll notice it tapers down into a smaller bit. This part's called the tail. So what we're going to be using is this center part here, and we're going to be using that for our beef Wellington. Now, this is a pretty well trimmed fillet. A lot of the fat has been kind of taken off. What we're going to do is we're just going to double check and see if there's any additional little bits of fat, and we're going to go ahead and either peel them off or trim them off. And I'm taking a quick look at my flour, which looks like it's right about the consistency that I want. I'm just going to get one glove off. I'm going to go grab my water. And I know that if you measure all of this out, you're going to look at this water and be like, that does not look like enough water for this dough. We're going to pour it in. We're just going to let it mix. It's going to mix for a while to incorporate. The interesting thing about doughs is they take a while to hydrate, and that's all of the flour absorbing all of the water and getting to a point where it's nice and malleable. It's going to take this dough a little bit of time to get there. So be patient, keep it on low. Go ahead and pour in all of your water, the 55 grams. And just let it stir, just let it mix. We'll come back to that in just a sec, and after we give it a little bit of time to kind of incorporate. If we need to add a little bit of water, we might, but I'm going to do everything I can not to add any more water. All right, so I'm taking a look at this. Actually, it looks pretty good. The only thing that I may do is on the back here, just trim off a little bit of this extra fat. The more fat you have on this beef, the more liquid there's going to be when you roast it, and it's going to be wrapped in pastry, so you really don't want very much moisture on this. You want to get as much of the fat off as you can, obviously without losing too much of the meat. But you don't want it to be so full of fat that it's going to be, you know, dripping out the bottom of the pastry, because then the pastry will be all soggy. Just do your best. You don't have to go crazy. And a lot of this will actually probably just kind of peel off if you just use your fingers. But if you need to use your knife, you just kind of slice along, then go for it. Just go ahead and give it a cut right here. And the dough looks really good, so I'm actually going to pause that. I'll set this aside. We'll come back to you a lot quicker than I thought it would. So we're going to go ahead and disconnect our paddle, pop off our dough, set it aside. Now, I would recommend you take this and put it in the fridge right now for about 20 minutes. I don't want to take the time to do that myself. I have a cook-along to run. So the colder you can keep this, the better the dough will be at the end. So for me, I'm just going to go ahead and show you what to do with this. I can always make another batch myself if this doesn't turn out the way I want it to. For you guys, if you have the time, go ahead and toss it in the fridge, let it rest in there for about 20 minutes, and then come back to it and continue. So I'm going to grab some of my flour and dust my cutting board. Hey, thanks, man. How's it going? And then we're going to get our dough rolled out, or pressed out, onto the cutting board. And we're going to get a little bit of flour on our hands as well, so that the dough doesn't get sticky. And all we're going to do is kind of bring this together and roll it into a nice little ball. Yeah, and the dough from there. Put the dough in my hands, and we're just going to go ahead and press this together like so. We're not going to do very much kneading. We don't want to warm the dough too much with our hands. We just want to press it together, form it into a little bit of a disc, like so. Set that aside. Now, this dough, when you roll it out and you get it down to about couple millimeters tall, or maybe like a 1/8 of an inch or so thick, it's going to be pretty sizable. So if this is enough for your beef Wellington, if you have a smaller beef Wellington, maybe 4, 5 inches wide, this will be perfect. If you're going to have a larger piece, like let's say you have a group of 10, a group of 12 people coming over, and you're going to have like a 12-inch or maybe even a little bit longer beef Wellington, you may need to do a double batch. Making more is better than having too little. Dough is cheap. So err on the side of having too much. And what we're going to do is incorporate this as best we can. Again, working pretty fast. You don't want to take too long because the warmth of your hands is actually going to cause the butter to start melting. And that's not what you want. What we want to do is form it into a disc like this. And then we're going to wrap this in either cling film, or you can also put it in a plastic bag. Just make sure to get all of the air out of the plastic bag before you put it in the fridge. That's basically it. Our dough is done. The rest of this video is going to be prepping our beef. Get all the little bits off, press them into the dough. And if you haven't worked with a full tenderloin before, a full beef tenderloin, it's really great. They're expensive, and it's prime meat. You can also get choice. It's probably just the same. Prime's going to be slightly higher quality, slightly more tender, and it costs. I mean, it's an expensive piece of meat, but you get a lot of meat out of it. So we're going to cut up into filet mignons. We're going to keep our main part for the Wellington itself, and then we'll have a couple of smaller petite fillets on the other end. And then if you take a look at actually how many fillets you get, filet mignon is pretty expensive when you just buy it at the store. Usually like 18 to 20 bucks per fillet. You're actually going to be getting a little bit of a deal on this larger piece of meat. Let's see. Grab my paring knife for this. Go swoop right across the top. And I'm just going to go ahead and pull this across like so. And what you're going to notice when you put this in the fridge or in the freezer, wherever you put it, if you put it in the fridge, the color is going to get a lot more uniform. The dough is going to become more supple. And that's, again, just a product of the hydration process as the flour absorbs more and more of the liquid more evenly. And that's also why we're covering it in plastic wrap so that it doesn't dry out. All right, here we go. Dough is ready. Try and get as much of the air out as you can. This goes in the fridge. I'm just going to set it in the fridge and wait until Thursday. This is ready to go. On Thursday, we'll pull this out right as we start, and we'll start kind of rolling it out and getting it flat. But that was easy. Now, a thing about this dough, this isn't just for beef Wellington. This will work if you like to make quiche, if you like to make frittatas. This is an excellent pie crust. So any kind of pastry that you're trying to make where you want a nice, fluffy, kind of flaky crust, this is a great dough to use. I'll go ahead and set that in there, and we'll get back to the meat. All right, done with our flour. Go ahead and pull this guy back over here. Perfect, perfect. So, got our meat, we got the club, we got the main part, and then we got the tail. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use a little bit of twine here. My dog is going to bark at nothing. We're going to go ahead and run our twine about halfway up the club. And we're just going to go ahead and tie a little bit of a knot. What are you barking at? There's nothing going on. There we go. Take that little piece, toss it away. Now what we're going to do is come down to the end of the club. and give this a little tie as well. Now what we're doing is we're essentially just kind of holding the beef together, making it a nice long cylinder so that we can more easily section it off into little cuts. Now you basically want to have about 2 inches or so in between each of these strings. So about 2 inches. And you'll notice that I put the butcher's twine, I actually just put it in a drawer. Because then you can just let it kind of roll around as you're using your twine and not have to worry about it falling off the counter or getting in the way on the cutting board or anything like that. And you can still stay close to your meat. Now let's see, the front there I'm actually going to leave. We're going to come in over here, get the very end of this piece here. There we go. Don't pull this too tight. You don't want to cinch it down. You just want to kind of hold it into a nice round shape. That's all you're going for here. Another thing that this will do is just kind of confirm where the taper starts for the tail, so that you know exactly how much of your actual Wellington you have. Ah, we're talking about gingerbread men, huh? Looks cool. Beef Wellington is a really tasty dish, really technical, but not super difficult. So it looks like cheese. Yeah, it kind of does, actually. Yeah, biscuit baking. I've seen a couple of them. They're actually not that bad. But yeah, that's what we're going to be. So the actual Beef Wellington is not going to be cooked tonight. That's going to be Christmas Eve. Tonight we're just getting things prepped. We got our dough done. We're going to section off our beef, and then that'll be the end of tonight. And then on Thursday, starting at 2:30, we'll actually be doing the Beef Wellington. And then, I don't know if you guys are new to the channel, but one of the things that we did back in November was turkey. We did a whole Thanksgiving cook-along where we, 6.5 hours of cooking, did a full Thanksgiving spread. It was pretty rad. Again, we're just going down. I think this is about where my taper is going to start. And the reason that it's important to know where the beef starts changing shape and getting thinner is because you want even cooking when you're doing this. And if you have a thicker piece of meat, it's going to take longer to cook than the thinner pieces of meat. So you really run the risk of overcooking the thinner pieces and undercooking the thicker pieces. So by kind of tying it off like this, you get a nice cylindrical shape. You know how thick excuse me, everything is. And you can basically size it appropriately so that everything cooks evenly. And then if you have people in your family who like a well done steak, you can absolutely leave a little bit of the taper on there so that they get the well done pieces, and you can keep the rarer pieces for yourself. Now, another thing, if you guys are using a butternut squash for this, I'm sorry, I have something in my throat and I don't know what. Now, if you guys are going to be using a butternut squash to do your Wellington, so you're going to make a butternut Wellington, the steps are the same. You're going to be still doing the mushroom duxelle for the wrap and everything like that. The difference is you're going to be probably using spinach leaves instead of pancetta or some other kind of leafy green, maybe kale, to do your wrap. So you're going to have the kale down or the spinach leaves down, the mushroom on top of that, and then the beef on top of it, or the butternut squash on top of that, and then that's going to be the wrap. It's really good, turns out really well. Just a different style if you're a vegetarian and still want to do something cool for Christmas. Not that there aren't other cool things that you can do as a vegetarian, but I think a Wellington is a treat. It's not vegan, and it's not vegan because we use the butter in the dough. But again, you could probably convert it to vegan if you are, just by grabbing some pre-made dough or find a vegan dough recipe. Now, as far as the butternut squash, you're just going to use the round neck part of the squash, and it'll simulate this cannon part of the fillet, which is the main part that we're going to be using. It's called the cannon. Now you'll notice that I'm going back and just adding another string in between the other two, or the other strings, and again, that's just to get a little bit of uniformity. Let's see here. And this will really kind of help you size it off. You know, each string is about 1 inch apart. And butcher's twine is, again, like flour, it's pretty cheap. So now, one thing that I'm also going to recommend, if you've never done a Wellington before, you generally are going to use saran wrap or some kind of cling film to help you with the wrapping of this dish. You're going to be putting down a roll of cling film. You're going to be putting down, let's say, your spinach or your pancetta or whatever you're using as your base. Spread your mushrooms, put the beef on, and then use the cling film to help roll the whole thing into a nice cylinder. I'm going to recommend, especially if you're using a bigger piece, a bigger cut of meat, getting a larger, wider piece of saran wrap. The saran wrap that you can buy in the stores, I think maximum is 18 inches wide, which comes out to about here. So let me do that. You can see the cling film here. This is a 24-inch wide cling film. So if you get a store one, it's going to come to about here. And you're going to be losing a lot of extra room. You're going to be losing about 6 inches of cling film. So if you can, get one of the bigger ones. Again, bigger is better for this. It's really, really difficult to kind of get the edges cinched to help compress your Wellington if you're using a shorter piece of cling film. Yeah, I've been drinking water all day. Sometimes I just get a little bit of a dry spot. Kind of interesting. Thank you for the tip, though. All right, here we go. You can pretty easily see where the taper is for the tail. Kind of starts right about here. Everything from here to here is about the same thickness, and then everything on that side is getting thinner. Everything over here is the club. And there we go. So we've got this all kind of sectioned off. What we're going to do is kind of decide where we want to cut it for our Wellington. I'm actually going to cut just the tip off of this piece right here and kind of come right by this string. And I'm going to do one motion if I can. And I'm going to move this club piece over. And this is going to be the start to the Wellington. And then I'm going to go, we have 6 people coming over, so I basically want about 6-inch pieces. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then I know that this is going to shrink a little bit when we cook it, so I'm actually going to add the 7th. And I'm going to cut just a little bit longer than that because I have the extra space, so why not make it a little bit bigger? We'll go ahead and do this. So there we go. We've got our cannon piece right here, which is the piece that we're going to be using for our Wellington. It gets a little bit thinner over on this side, so if somebody wants a little bit of a more well-done piece of meat, I know that I'm going to have that available for them, but everything in the middle is going to be cooked about the same. This is essentially the end of the meat. We're going to go ahead and wrap this, set it in the fridge. The day before, so Wednesday, I'm going to pull this out and I'm going to season it. I'm going to add some salt, not a lot, just a little bit. All around the outside, and then I'm going to let it sit uncovered in the fridge to kind of dry out before we start searing it off on Thursday. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and, since we're not using this for dough anymore, I'll just set those guys there. Pull this over like so, and again, we're going to kind of get a head start on our wrapping. Here with the cannon. We're not going to be doing this into we're not going to be pressing this into a cylinder or compressing it at all. I really just want to keep air off of it. Get as much of the air out as I can, and then just kind of pinch down the sides to seal it. And then I'm going to put this whole thing into a Ziploc bag, since obviously the cutting board has some meat goober on it, and I want to avoid getting that all over my fridge. So just a couple of rolls just to kind of keep it closed. Now I'm going to grab a Ziploc, and we'll get that guy into the fridge. And actually, I have a Ziploc over here that I can reuse that I was using for taco shells. I'll just go ahead and get him in there. And we got a nice beef Wellington, nice beef cannon here, ready for our Wellington. Get as much of the air out of this as well. And we're just going to set this in the fridge for a couple of days. That can sit there. Now, I've got all this meat left over. What am I going to do with it? Well, here we got our petite fillets. We've got at least 1-inch piece here. So I actually might cut this a little bit thicker. Do something like so. Got a nice fillet there. And then the rest of this tail, probably try and cut a piece about the same height. There we go. And we got a little bit there that we can either use for stock or just kind of cook it off and make a nice little snack. And with our club, we've got some really nice looking fillets here. Now, on these ones here I made a little bit taller because they're smaller pieces of meat. This one here, these are going to be very large pieces of meat, so I might actually just go 1-inch thick on these. There we go. Nice fillet there. So you'll see that you're getting plenty of fillet cuts out of this more expensive primal cut that you bought. But if you take all of these together and compare them to what it would cost you to go to a store and buy them separately, you're actually saving yourself quite a bit. And you'll notice the string is helping to kind of keep them in their round steak shape. And then I cut through one of the strings there. So I may tie this one here off again, or I may just do this. We'll let him kind of free float. I got a couple of little pieces there that we can sear off for snack or dinner or whatever. All right, so meat's prepped. We're good to go. I'm going to go ahead and take these guys and get them kind of wrapped as well. I'm probably going to cook one for dinner tonight. And we'll go ahead and get our Beef Wellington going on Thursday. I hope to see you there. It'll be 2:30 p.m. Pacific time. We'll get started. The entire process will take about 2.5 to 3 hours. It is a long thing. However, there are breaks in there, so that won't be straight cooking. There's a lot of steps like wrapping it, getting things prepped and set aside and things like that. So hope to see you on Thursday. And Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, everybody. Happy Kwanzaa, Happy Hanukkah, everything. I am kind of agnostic to the celebration. I just celebrate them all. I think all of them are worthy and awesome. And hope that you guys are going to be joining me to cook an epic meal for whatever it is that you're celebrating on Thursday. And we'll see you again for another wonderful Cook Along Live. Have a great night, everybody.